The sun beat down on the cracked pavement outside Granger's garage, its faded sign hanging crooked above the peeling awning. Rust bloomed along the edges of the metal door like ivy, and inside, the silhouette of a vintage Ford Mustang sat in shadow, half restored and gathering dust. On a crooked lawn chair, Earl Granger sat back, his denim shirt rolled at the sleeves, cap low over his silver brows. His hands, rough, stained, calloused, rested on a cold can of root beer. Across from him stood a young man in a sharply tailored navy suit, polished shoes tapping impatiently against the concrete. His name was Carter Langston, and the digital tablet he held felt like a weapon. "Mr. Granger," Carter said, voice firm, corporate. "This land sits on a proposed commercial development site. My firm, Langston Holdings, has been authorized to buy. You're the last holdout." Earl took a slow sip from his can. He didn't blink. "You're sitting on prime real estate," Carter continued, scrolling with a finger. 300,000 cash. That's 3 times market value for this place." Earl looked out toward the fields, golden with July heat. "That's so," he murmured. "Yes, sir. And I suggest you take it. The board won't offer again." The silence stretched. A truck rattled by in the distance. Earl finally leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "This garage has been here since 1958. Built it with my own hands. Fixed engines when your daddy was still riding a tricycle." Carter smirked. "Time changes everything, Mr. Granger. Sentiment doesn't pay property tax." Earl's eyes twinkled, not with anger, but something else. Amusement, maybe. Or challenge. "Well then," he said, standing slowly, "I guess it's time we see what's worth more, memory or money." Earl stepped into the dim garage, the air thick with grease, memory, and metal. Carter hesitated before following. The contrast was immediate. Leather soles on oil-stained concrete, digital certainty clashing with analog grit. "This place," Earl began, running his fingers across the fender of the Mustang, "ain't just bolts and engines. That there's the first car I ever rebuilt. I was 17. Carter scanned the room. Tools hung in neat rows, some older than he was. Yellowed photos of Earl and customers, handshakes, grins, grease-covered arms lined the walls. It was more than a shop. It was a museum of stories. "I'm sure it means something to you," Carter said, tapping the tablet. "But it doesn't change what's coming. A gas station, 2 fast food chains, a hotel. Your land's in the way of progress." Earl chuckled softly. "You call that progress? Another box with a drive-through?" Carter stiffened. "Jobs, revenue, change." Earl leaned against the old car. "You sound like your father." Carter looked up, surprised. "You knew my father?" "Knew him well. He came here every summer during college. Fixed his bike in that corner." "Your grandfather sent him to learn about real work." Carter said nothing. Earl continued. "He used to say this garage smelled like sweat and stories. But you," Earl looked him over, "you just smell like deadlines." Carter's jaw tightened. "I'm not here to talk about the past." "No," Earl said, nodding. "You're here to bury it." Outside, a wind kicked up dust, swirling around the faded Granger's sign. Inside, Carter stared at Earl, older, slower, but not broken, not even close. "This ain't about the money, is it?" Carter asked. Earl gave a half smile. "Son, it never was." Carter's phone buzzed. He ignored it. Earl walked over to a wooden drawer near the workbench, pulled it open, and carefully retrieved something wrapped in an old cloth. He unrolled it slowly. Inside was a silver wristwatch, scratched and worn, the kind they didn't make anymore. "This was your father's," Earl said, offering it forward. Carter blinked, confused. "My father's. Left it here the last summer he came by. Said he'd come back for it. Never did." Carter hesitated, then took the watch. It was heavier than it looked, ticking steadily. He hadn't seen it before, not even in family photos. It felt oddly alive in his palm. "Why didn't you send it back?" "Because I figured when he was ready, he'd come find it himself." Carter stared down at the ticking second hand. Earl leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. He was different back then. Worked hard, listened, never thought he'd turn into a man who sends lawyers to do his talking. "I'm not a lawyer," Carter said quietly. "You could have fooled me." A long silence settled. Finally, Carter asked, "Did my father really value this place?" "Boy," Earl said, his voice softening, "your father learned who he was under that lift, elbow deep in broken engines. He used to say he came here to stop pretending." Carter looked around, as if seeing the garage for the first time. "But you," Earl said, "you came here to erase it." Carter put the watch in his pocket. I came here to do my job. Funny thing about jobs, Earl said. Sometimes they're the excuse we use to ignore what matters. Outside, the sun dipped lower. Inside, two men, one young, one old, stood in a garage full of ghosts. Later that night, Carter sat in his hotel room, the city buzzing below, neon lights bleeding into the glass. But his thoughts were stuck in the garage, with the dust, the watch, and the man who seemed to know more about his father than he ever had. He turned the silver watch over in his hand, staring at the initials on the back, RL. Richard Langston, his father. Carter barely remembered him before the business took over. His childhood was spreadsheets and nannies, boardrooms and flight delays. But now, that quiet old man from the garage had painted a different picture, a younger Richard, laughing, learning, building. He picked up his tablet and opened the Langston Holdings file on the Granger property. Line after line of permits, surveys, city plans, legal, clean, inevitable. But beneath it all, something felt off. He zoomed in on one old zoning document. There it was, a handwritten note in the margins, family exemption, non-commercial property until 2030 unless willingly sold. His brow furrowed. This clause had never made it into the version his team gave him. Had someone buried it? He tapped a number on his phone. Jeff, it's Carter. I want a full audit on the Granger property files, everything. Now. But the board, now. He hung up, tossed the tablet aside, and looked again at the watch. Something shifted inside him. Maybe this wasn't just business after all. Back at the garage, Earl sat on a stool, cleaning a carburetor by lantern light. The hum of the bugs outside was the only noise. He moved slowly, methodically, as if each part had a story. A knock on the door startled him. It creaked open, and Carter stepped in, jacket off, sleeves rolled. "You always work this late?" Carter asked. Earl didn't look up. "Engines don't sleep." Carter walked slowly around the garage, more curious now than before. "I checked the zoning files. You're protected until 2030 unless you choose to sell." Earl nodded. "And yet here you are. I didn't know. They kept it from me." Earl finally looked up, his eyes measuring. "So now what?" "I think someone wants this deal to go through. Badly, and they were willing to lie to me to make it happen." Earl leaned back. "Welcome to the world of business, son." Carter frowned. "You're not surprised?" "Nope. Been fighting off buyers since the day your father left town. Why not sell before? You'd have made millions." Earl shrugged. "There's more than one kind of wealth. Some of it don't fit in a bank." Carter sat down across from him. "Tell me about him. My dad. The part I never got to see." Earl smiled faintly. "He was restless, smart, worked harder than anyone I knew, but he always thought he had to prove something. Same look in your eyes right now." Carter nodded slowly, the garage around him beginning to feel less like a relic and more like a mirror. Earl continued cleaning, not pushing, and Carter, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel the urge to run. Langston Holdings headquarters buzzed with tension. Carter barged into the legal department the next morning. He tossed a folder on the conference table. "Why wasn't this clause disclosed?" he demanded, his voice sharp. Jeff, the lead legal exec, barely looked up. "We deemed it irrelevant. It was handwritten and outdated. The board wanted to expedite. You forged consent by omission." Jeff smirked. "We accelerated the process. That's what we do." Carter's voice dropped. "You lied to me. You've benefited from that kind of speed before." Carter stepped closer. "Not like this. You getting sentimental over a rusty garage?" Carter's jaw clenched. He grabbed the folder and walked out. In his office, he stared at the company logo on the wall. Langston Holdings, built on efficiency, acquisition, and precision. But what did it cost? He looked out the window, the skyline glittering like polished steel, but felt cold. That night, he returned to the garage again. Earl was underneath a truck, hands covered in grease. "You fixed that zoning mess?" Earl asked. Carter nodded. "They broke the law. I'll undo it." Earl grunted. "You're your father's son, after all." Carter hesitated. "Not sure what that means yet." Earl smiled faintly. "Means you've still got time to figure it out." Outside, the stars blinked through the haze. Inside, the scent of oil and honesty lingered in the air. Days passed. Carter began to show up regularly. At first, just to talk, then to help, holding tools, fetching parts, trying to learn. He wasn't good at it. He dropped wrenches, stained his shirt, cursed when bolts slipped. Earl just chuckled. "You're too clean. Life's not made to stay polished." One afternoon, Carter brought a rolled blueprint. "I've been working on this," he said. "A plan to preserve the garage and build a heritage space around it. The city could turn it into a landmark, education, history, community." Earl eyed him. "What about your board?" "They won't like it. But you're doing it anyway." Carter nodded. "I'm tired of building things that disappear." Earl didn't speak for a long time. Then he walked to the corner of the garage, pulled a dusty old key from a hook, and tossed it to Carter. "You want to build something real?" he said. "Start here." Carter caught the key mid-air, surprised. "What is it?" "The attic. Your father used it for his journals, notes, sketches." Carter's eyes widened. "He kept records?" "Whole life written in oil-stained notebooks." Later, Carter climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, his heart pounding. Dust filled the air. Cobwebs clung to the low beams. And in a battered wooden crate, beneath a tarp, he found them, dozens of notebooks. The first one opened to a simple line, "One day my son will understand." Carter sat in silence, the key still in his palm. For the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider in the garage. He felt home. Carter spent hours in the attic, dust swirling as he flipped through the notebooks. His father's handwriting was hurried but full of life. Sketches of engines, diagrams, quotes scribbled in the margins. But it wasn't just mechanics. These pages held thoughts, frustrations, dreams. One passage stopped him cold. "Granger's is where I learned how to fail without shame and build without fear. I pray my son finds his own Granger someday." Carter swallowed hard. The next morning he returned to the garage, eyes red, the journal clutched under one arm. Earl looked up from the hood of a Buick. "You find what you needed?" Carter nodded. "Yeah, I think I found him." They spent the morning fixing an alternator. Carter asked questions this time. He listened. At noon, Earl handed him a brown paper bag. "Sandwich. You're useless when you're hungry." Carter smiled. Later, he checked his phone, messages from the board piling up. He turned it off. Instead, he picked up a wrench. Earl watched from across the garage, a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. Outside, the wind stirred the dust and lifted the faded banner that still read Granger's. Inside, something was changing. Old wounds healing, new roots forming. Carter didn't fully understand what he was becoming, but for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he was losing anything by slowing down. He felt like he was gaining something real. The board wasn't quiet for long. Emails turned to phone calls. Meetings were scheduled. Investors were worried. Jeff, the legal exec, stormed into Carter's office. "Are you sabotaging the Granger deal?" Carter stood tall. "I'm protecting it. This garage is holding up a $12 million project. Then we rethink the project." Jeff's face twisted. "You've gone soft. You want to be a mechanic now." "No," Carter said calmly. "I want to build things that matter." Later that night, Carter met Earl on the back porch of the garage. They sat in silence, sipping coffee as cicadas buzzed. "I think I'm going to resign," Carter said. Earl raised an eyebrow. "Just like that? I'm tired of trading purpose for profit. My father didn't forget this place. He just didn't think I'd understand." Earl leaned back. "And now?" "Now I do." Earl nodded. "Took you long enough." Carter chuckled, then grew serious. "I want to renovate the shop, keep it open, build something around it, teach kids, host workshops, make it what it was for Dad." Earl said nothing for a moment. Then he extended his hand. "You've got grease under your nails now. I think you're ready." They shook. A deal not for land, but for legacy. Carter stood before the Langston Holdings boardroom one last time. His suit was wrinkled, his tie was gone, but his voice was steady. "I'm withdrawing the Granger proposal," he said. "We're repurposing the space, heritage designation, community restoration. It won't be sold." The boardroom erupted. "You don't have that authority." "I do until I resign. Effective immediately." Gasps. Phones buzzed. Jeff turned red. "You're throwing your career away." "No," Carter said. "I'm finally using it." He dropped a printed report on the table, Granger Community Center proposal. Inside were plans, funding outlines, letters of support from local schools, historical associations, even city officials intrigued by the preservation effort. Carter walked out without another word. Outside, the city felt less suffocating. Back at the garage, he rolled up his sleeves, already thinking about renovations. Earl handed Carter a sledgehammer. "Don't get too excited," he warned. "We're not tearing it down, just clearing the back wall." Carter grinned and took a swing, knocking loose a rotten board. Neighbors gathered to watch. Kids peeked inside the dusty shop, their eyes lighting up at the sight of old cars and racks of tools. Volunteers arrived, local carpenters, former customers, even a high school shop teacher. Word spread. The garage wasn't closing. It was becoming something new. Under Earl's supervision, Carter led the project. Paint peeled, walls were reinforced, banners were hung. And above it all, the sign stayed. Granger's. Since 1958. 6 months later, the ribbon cutting drew a small but proud crowd. Carter wore jeans. Earl wore his same old denim shirt. Kids buzzed around refurbished workbenches, eyes wide as volunteers showed them how to change oil, sand wood, weld parts. News crews filmed the transformation. "This used to be a forgotten corner," a local reporter said. "Now it's a place where hands get dirty and lives get shaped." Inside, Carter had created a display, his father's journals, the silver watch, and photos of the original garage team. Earl in the center, a young Richard Langston beside him, all smiles. Carter looked at it quietly, then back to Earl. "I think he'd be proud." Earl just nodded. "I know he is." One afternoon, a black SUV pulled into the dusty drive. The door opened, and a boy stepped out, 18, stiff, wearing an expensive polo. Carter wiped his hands and approached. "You're Alex Langston?" The boy nodded. "Your cousin. I didn't know you were coming. I had to see it. Everyone says you threw away the company for this." Carter looked at the garage, the laughter of kids inside, the sound of tools buzzing. "I didn't throw anything away," he said. "I chose something better." Alex stepped inside, hesitant. He looked around, then slowly smiled. "Teach me?" Carter handed him gloves. "Let's get to work." Years passed. Granger's garage became more than a landmark. It became a symbol. Kids who once wandered in now taught others. Carter, now older, still worked beside Earl, who moved a little slower but never stopped mentoring. The watch still ticked on the display wall. Visitors came from other towns, inspired to preserve their own stories. And above the garage, the old sign remained, a reminder that value isn't always profit, and some legacies run deeper than business. On one quiet morning, Earl looked at Carter and said, "Your father would have loved this." Carter smiled. "He's here, in all of it," and the engine hummed to life again.